I think what sold me there was I had become a midwife and realized that at that moment the job market wasn't so good for me, but I needed to go somewhere where I could work. And the manager of that unit of this hospital kind of looked at me. I said to her, "You realize I'm a man, right?" I'm like, and she said, and she looked at me and she kind of said, "So." She said, "That's okay." She's like, "Are you going to give good care to my patients?" And I was like, "Okay, that bonded me."
Hey everyone, I'm your midwife, Tanya Tringali. Welcome to the Motherwit Podcast, a show about the issues we, healthcare consumers and providers face every day as we interact with the medical system. We'll talk about its blind spots, shortcomings, and share strategies we can use to feel seen and heard, no matter which side of the table we sit on. Ever since the Mid-Husbands episode about a year ago, I've been meaning to interview a male midwife. I got some interesting questions about male midwives after that, and I had one lined up, but it fell through. And I recently connected with, or perhaps I should say, reconnected with, although our connection was many years ago and very brief, and our guest today probably doesn't even remember it. But anyway, my guest today is Paul Quinn. He has been a midwife for nearly 30 years. He currently works at the Valley Hospital in Ridgewood, New Jersey. He's a professor in obstetrical nursing and nursing research at Dominican University in New York, and he's the author of 5 books, including his newest book, a cookbook to be specific, called Pregnant Possibilities, which serves as a blueprint for women and their families during pregnancy. Hi, Paul. Thanks for coming today.
Hello, Tanya. I'm so happy to be here with you and so glad to reconnect with you.
I don't know if you are aware of this, but we met like a gazillion years ago, briefly.
I was part of your hiring. It was so great. It was like it's somebody who wanted to go, who's determined to be a midwife, and I was like,
Oh, that was so
hire
cool.
this girl.
Well, I didn't remember that you had as much to do with my hiring as all that, to be honest. I remember the day we met, and I remember you for 2 reasons. One, I didn't know many midwives. I was not yet a midwife. I was a new nurse. Well, not brand new, but I was leaving my first ever nursing job to come to a better nursing job, and that it was for sure. I was making my plans to start midwifery school, and I met you, and you were already a midwife, and you were a man, and that was unique, and you were the first male midwife I ever met, so I remembered you. And so when I saw your name come across, I was like, holy shit, I know him. I don't think he knows me, but I know
him. But you know what was good about that job was because it was a different time and place in terms of obstetrics and in terms of midwifery. So I was able to kind of control how the direction of that department went. So it was like I, as a director, wanted to be involved acutely with my managers, like who they hired, because I wanted to be sure that the provider, whether that be a nurse, a tech, whoever, was somebody that I knew was going to move my department and move our goals forward, because I wanted to promote the midwifery model as best as I could at the bedside. So when I heard that you were going to go to midwifery school, I was like, oh, she's got this. You know, she knows exactly where I'm going with this and what my goals were as a leader to go give these women the experience they had. And thankfully and proudly, that hospital had great patient experience scores, and the families came back to have other babies there, and daughters of mothers had their babies there. So we had generations of babies in that hospital. So I was very proud of that model that they put there. And it's still an amazing institution, and I'm proud of it. And that you and I left that place better than when we got it.
There's a difference between working at like a tertiary medical center, right, where there are residents running around and it's like high acuity level, and that of a community hospital. And this was a community hospital. It was my first experience at a community hospital. And it's such a beautiful place. Like probably all community hospitals compared to tertiary care hospitals. But my experience as a nurse and what made me go there, and I don't remember who it was that told me to go there. I'm going to guess that it was Robin Bradley. who has been on this podcast. I'll link back to her episode as well. I bet you it was Robin Bradley because she was a midwife at this hospital before joining a private practice at the place where I ended up training as a midwife. But I think it was her, and she told me, you're going to get a lot more hands-on experience that's more useful if your end goal is to be a midwife. And boy, was that the truth. Because there's not a lot of places in the world where nurses, in the world, I should not say that, in the United States, predominantly on the East Coast, where nurses get to do vaginal exams and are super independent. And that's what I was hungry for. And that hospital gave me that and allowed me to be like the very best nurse I could be on labor and delivery at that time in my life.
Right. I think what sold me there was I had become a midwife and realized that at that moment the job market wasn't so good for me, but I needed to go somewhere where I could work. And the manager of that unit of this hospital kind of looked at me. I said to her, "You realize I'm a man, right?" And she said, and she looked at me and she kind of said, "So?" She said, "That's okay." She's like, "Are you going to give good care to my patients?" And I was like, okay, that bonded me. And then I went to nights because I want like that. I figured nights was always the legendary best place to get experience. And on that crew, we had the most experienced night people ever. And I had my own skills that I came with because I was already a midwife when I worked there. And the nurses that were there taught me even more than I had. So when I was done there, I blessed those women because thankfully we're all still friends and we're all still connected. But I learned so much from these amazing, amazing nurses who were amazing women and just amazing people who embraced me and said, "You're one of us." And I will never forget that experience. That was one of, and again, that hospital, I'm so proud is still thriving. And again, I whatever part I contributed to that, I'm blessed for because that was truly worth my time and my effort and stuff because it's such a great place. And I'm happy for those women that they get that experience.
Totally was. And thank you so much for welcoming me on board there because I really do see that as a critical turning point for me in becoming a midwife. So yes, thank you so much. And I'm so glad that we've reconnected. But on that note, since you've just pointed out what it was to be a male midwife back in that time, can you just take us back in time and tell us a little bit about your path to midwifery? Like, why midwifery? What was happening in your life and your career that led you there? Where does this passion come from?
Do you know what's strange? So I'm honored that I am the son of a nurse. So I'm going to start there, that my mother is a nurse and my mom was trained in the 60s in Brooklyn. And she went to Kings County Hospital School of Nursing, so she's a diploma grad. And what was strange was that back in those days, nurses took their boards in sections. So there was an OB section, a psych section, med-surg, peds, etc. So my mother apparently got one of the highest grades in New York State in obstetrics. And she got this beautiful pin. And it was from the 60s, so it was thick and it was solid gold. And it has I guess what's imprinted on it is a woman holding a baby. And it was this award she got because in the state they recognized her. And I always remember that pin was in her jewelry box. And, she kind of brought it out and she showed it to me across time. So it was always there. When my mother first graduated, she was engaged to my father and she moved out of Brooklyn up to Rockland County. And her first job as a diploma nurse was like, "You're going to the nursery." So my mother worked in the nursery. Whether she liked it or not, that's where she was going. So she went over there. But my mother always had this affinity for obstetrics. So in my life, my mother was always a nurse. She always worked the night shift. She was a nurse leader all my whole life. So when I was in high school, I was, of course, enamored by healthcare. I was going to be a physician, and I thought I was going to go be a plastic surgeon and go do all this stuff. But somehow I ended up in the newborn nursery at 14, taking care of babies. And in the 80s, you could be a teenager that young and take care of kids. And plus I had an in because my mom was a nurse leader at the hospital. But here I was, taking care of these babies, and the pregnant women would come down one hallway and they'd go in the back and then the baby would come out. And I was like, how did it go from that to this? And, the L&D nurse would bring the baby and I'd hear the report. And you're like, Mom had this, she had D-cell, she had section, she was this, Mom has herpes, the whole history that we all had. And there was this one nurse, and she is a fellow midwife. Her name is Kathy Yuhas-Arflak. And Kathy decided in the 80s that she wanted to become a midwife, and she went to England. And she went to the Queen Charlotte's Hospital School of Midwifery. So she left, and she had a master's degree from the University of Arizona. And it was like she was one of the first master's prepared nurses I knew, but she was one of the first midwives I knew. And she went over to Britain to go train. And she would write me letters and talk about how she would be a health visitor, and she would go and sit on a piece of newspaper because the house was kind of gross. And she was going into these really seedy places, but she was in like the East End of London delivering babies in the home plus in the hospital. And I was so like, yes. And hearing her passion for this, and we are still friends and still connected. And Kathy is working in a different level of women's healthcare, but she talked about this, and I was like, that's what I want to do. And she inspired the nurse manager of that hospital's labor and delivery unit, who's still a practicing midwife. So now Tara Scaglione became a midwife, and she trained at Columbia. So it was like all of a sudden midwives were becoming these things, and it was advanced practice was just burgeoning then in the early 90s, but they were truly something. So I was like, this was incredible. And that's what started me to say, I want to do what they're doing. And I went to nursing school to go into obstetrics, but I went to a Catholic hospital-based diploma program. Best experience in my life, but not the most welcoming to men in obstetrics. So they all said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to have to go through the back door. So med-surg, critical care, emergency room, go this way, come back with all this experience before I knocked on that OB door. And there it was. And I finally had that opening, and it was in 1998 to go to midwifery school because they were opening in New York as an opportunity. And I said, well, I've got as much or better experience than half of these people. I'm going to try. And I did. And I got in.
What school was that?
I started at SUNY Stony Brook, which was an online program. And as great as it was, the problem was finding clinical and finding a place to practice those hand skills that we all need to go. So then it was open at SUNY downstate. So SUNY to SUNY, I was able to transfer. And when I went in there, I went into this little pocket of 8 other midwifery students, handheld by the leaders. So Lily Shah, Suzanne Schechter, Alita, just amazing midwives who taught me. And I was fortunate enough that school provided me clinicals. So I was trained in the Bronx. And I got to do all my clinicals with, I was trained under Susan Papera, Nancy Campo, Pixie, people that were our midwifery foremothers who were just like famous, that trained me and guided my hands. And of course, my ultimate kudos goes to Jeanne Murphy, who, literally guided my hands on all my deliveries. I definitely hold a place in my heart for Jeanne Murphy.
Wow. You just went through the legendary names of like New York and Northeast United States midwifery. So this episode, I'm going to have to like find a lot of bios of people to put in the show notes.
Shout out to those women.
You just rolled through it. Now, question for you. Was the difficulty in getting clinical experience a product of the times, which we still have this problem, or was it you being a man?
I'm going to say A, then B. Okay. I think A was because people... it's amazing. Centuries of people were delivered by midwives. People who were lay midwives, who had not the training that we had or the certification that we have or our experience. My father was delivered by a midwife in Brooklyn. It's like my great-grandmother delivered 17 children in a tenement apartment in Brooklyn without anybody. It's probably why she died at 41. But, she all she did was spend most of her adult life pregnant. So I'm not the only unique family like that. So midwives have been everywhere, every place, whether they were licensed or just blessed as one, we've been there. And now somewhere it became too medicalized and our birth changed. So people thought that we were too weird and that we were too freaky or whatever, and that we didn't offer pain management. We didn't offer any support for emergencies. We didn't do anything other than coo and, make people squat and do all stuff. When we were so much more than that. And then you had a man on top of it. But I truly think that the gender was secondary to the people with the reticence to accept what we brought to the delivery experience. And I think they loved what we did with that relationship with our patients. But when it came down to the tooth and nails of like, okay, now it's time to deliver, all of a sudden it became an emergency, and it became something acute, and it became something critical. And not every woman needed that. So I think there was a lot of hesitance for us, and then came the lawsuits. And I think everybody was so afraid of getting sued that we, not the residents, not the interns who had no experience, we were going to harm somebody more than they ever would. So I think at that time for me was that piece of the safety and the legality of it that just got in the way and clouded the waters there.
Yeah. Are you pregnant or a new parent looking to ensure a better postpartum experience? Or are you a birth worker looking to improve your postpartum care skills? Check out Thriving After Birth, an online self-paced course by me, midwife and educator Tanya Tringali. It's 10.5 hours of video content featuring experts in lactation, mental health, pelvic floor health, pediatric sleep issues. You also get worksheets and a workbook, as well as options to have a one-on-one session with me. Sign up at motherwitmaternity.com/thriving, and let's improve postpartum care together. So what is it that you think, what is the perspective that you think men bring to this profession? Because for our listeners who may not know this, the statistic, I don't know how much it's changed. It feels like it's changing. And I did try to look this up before recording with you, but I'm still just seeing this number that I've known for my entire career, which is that men make up only about 1% of our profession. And again, it feels like it's shifting, but a shift from 1%, even if it doubles, is still very small, right?
Right.
So from that perspective, what is it that men bring to midwifery that is unique and valuable?
So first, I think if a man is going into midwifery, he's a special kind of man. And it's not for every nurse. The same as ER, OR, PEDS is not for everybody. You have to be somebody who's a man who's okay with being soft, gentle, tearful, charismatic, able to laugh, but able to switch gears. And you have to be okay with that side of you. And if you're okay with that emotional side of you, because you're entering that experience of a woman or a family or a couple or wherever they are, to be at the most intimate, most precarious moment of their life, and you're invited in. You're not forced there. You're invited in. And that piece has to be a special kind of guy who can do that. And you have to be able to be that for your shift or your time or whatever period you're with her, and then go home and be whoever you're supposed to be. So you can be as rough and tumble and rugged as you want to be, but in that moment, you're going to be asked to be a little bit more sensitive and genteel. So you have to be able to switch those gears back and forth. But I think that as a man, most of us who go into midwifery understand this is the one experience in life we will never, ever experience. I will never be pregnant. I can never be in your shoes. So all I can do is put every ounce of my empathy into what you're going through and feel your experience and say, you got it. I mean, let me do this. What you guide me as to what I can do to you. What can I do to make you more comfortable? What can I do to make this more memorable? What can I do? And that's the question you gotta keep asking, is what can I do? And I know what I will do, but I have to get through there. So a special man has to be able to cross that bridge and go back and forth and switch back and forth and vacillate between that and bring that heart to there.
I so value your perspective because that's your lived experience on it. But from where I sit, I still look at this and say, okay, now if there is a woman who is a midwife and has not had children for whatever reason that could be, no one ever looks at her and has that expectation that you just set for yourself. And I get that we share organs and body parts and okay, there's like a gradation that's happening here. But it's like there's that piece, and then there's the fact that nobody has those expectations of a male obstetrician. Right? So it's always been so interesting to me that the male midwife is held to, it seems to me, a higher ethical standard or moral standard or something. I may not even be choosing my words right. You might have to correct me a little bit. But there's something that sets your experience apart from that of a female midwife or OB who has never had children, may never have children, or even the male obstetrician.
Right. I had to get over the creepy factor. So it's like, so, okay, a woman going into this, of course, a female nurse doing this. So what, and even the title alone, like, why am I a wife? I'm a midwife. It's like, but again, that title, it goes back to with woman. It goes back to that whole piece. So I wanted to be with woman, and because that's where I felt my heart belonged. But a lot of people, I get it. It's that factor. But the doctors, the physicians, medicalize that and look at it and say, okay, what's wrong? What could go wrong with her? That's how I see it. Like, here is she? Where is she now? And where could she go off the rails? And which way? Is she going to hemorrhage? Is the baby going to decel? Is she going to prolapse a cord? Every one of those emergencies we learn about she is one of those people. Every one of those patients is one of those women who's going to have one of those things. Whereas midwives, we look at her and say, well, what's going to go right? How are we going to make this happen? Because this is normal. Right. And we look at birth as a normal experience. As painful and treacherous as it can be, it's a normal process, and we're going to navigate her through it. So I think there's a piece there where the male nurse may look at it a little more tactically and say, okay, well, I'm going to get her through this, how this is going to go. But I'm going to pull in everybody else who's around me, which is mostly women, who's going to help me get her through this. So I don't think it's a gender thing per se, other than the fact that like I said, I keep calling it the creepy factor, because they figure, like, why would you do this when there's so many other brilliant opportunities for you? Go into anesthesia, go into the ER, go into transport nursing, go into these other real rugged, hit the ground streets, grit. Like, OB is grit too. There's a lot of grit in OB, but they don't see that because it's pretty, and we only see the pretty.
I don't think people understand, and this is kind of more maybe for our listeners who are the consumers of healthcare. In case this isn't clear to you, working on L&D in whatever capacity is really a lot like working in an ER. It's just specific to obstetrical situations that are unfolding. People come into ERs for very minor things all the way to very serious things that are life-threatening, and L&D is exactly the same way. You go through triage in the same way. It's such a similar process.
Absolutely.
So that mindset really works well. And so one thing that I'm proud of in terms of our evolution as a profession, especially when it comes to education, is that we are taking in a lot more midwifery students who haven't worked L&D, and they're able to call on their experience of working in an ER or an ICU, and then know that they can learn all that stuff, that we don't have to build on top. We can, and it's wonderful and it's useful, but I always tell people that there's a lot of unlearning that the L&D nurse of many years has to do when they become a midwife.
Absolutely.
Especially if they worked in a purely or mostly obstetrical model.
Right, and I feel like because OB and L&D may be the only time she gets health care, so all those other things that were in the background, like her asthma, like her high blood pressure, like her obesity and her thyroid problem, are going to come to the surface. And the midwife may be the only primary care practitioner she sees and is willing to go back to, because, again, it's herself and her baby. So it's up to us to be able to sift through that muck and come back and kind of right her path and get her back, because if mom is right and daughter's right or whoever, that may also trigger the family to come back and get care from a trusted practitioner who we may be the only one they trust. And if we can touch some members of that family, that's great, but we are probably the only primary person that person will see from 20 to maybe 45 or 50. So we hold a role there that's very, sanctified, we are probably the trusted person that they see because we deliver their baby, and they trust us for that. They'll trust us to say, okay, I will try this medication or get this followed, get that mammogram, go get a DEXA scan. Like, we can really affect the care of one woman and the generations around her.
I agree with that.
It's very hard. And the ER is truly, L&D is one of those places where you have to kind of pull all that back, where you may realize your labor is not going well because she's got all these other problems going by, and the side effects of all the medications we give affect if she's got underlying conditions. So true, I agree with you, having that background of more than just obstetrics. It's like, it is a comprehensive care model that we embrace.
Yeah. And we're in the process of overcoming, I think, so many stereotypes that have evolved from so many different directions, whether that be the stereotype about our possible, inaccurate, of course, lack of education when it comes to certain things, be it managing emergencies, our ability to do so, but also, from the other side as well. I think as obstetrics has become so medicalized, some of us have gotten siloed into that too. And we can feel like we can't maybe navigate the waters or practice the way we want to practice. Have you felt that in your own career? Certainly that is what's led me to do so many of the things that I do, be it my small virtual practice, my podcast. It's all coming from this place of managing my frustration with the system of not being able to practice the way I want to practice easily.
Exactly, because basically we need a job. So you get hired into a job and you have to conform to what the job wants you to do. So if you work in a system, you have to do what the system tells you to do, and you're allowed to be as good as we want to be, but not only to an extent. There's expectations, how many patients you'll see per hour, what kind of deliveries you'll do, where you will stop and somebody else will take over, even though it may be completely inaccurate or inappropriate that you have to do this. So it's like you want to do what you want to do because you were trained to do this, and you still want to do as much as you can with what you have. But not all of us can go open up our own birth center, hang out our shingle, and say, okay, come and deliver in my house. It's not, or I'll go to you. So there's so many layers that have been built on our specialty versus other ones that, right, wrong, or indifferent, it's what's there and it's what we're going against. And in the 30 plus years I've been in nursing and the 20 plus years I've been in midwifery, they're not changing. And it's kind of the last bastion of anything, because we're in this pocket, usually behind locked doors where you need access to get into. And we only come in when there's a problem. We don't see all the normal that we do. We don't see the everyday hundreds and hundreds of normal deliveries and normal outcomes. We see the one bad one, which taints every other thousands of good ones we've done. Yeah. And they forget that it's not us per se, it's what happens. Yeah. And it's going to happen, but we are up against a wall of it's brick, mortars, concrete. We still can't conquer it because I still feel the overriding thing is legality. I still feel like we are up against something that just years ago wasn't there and nobody cared about, and all of a sudden swept in somewhere where we weren't aware of, and is getting stronger that we can't fight. Yeah. And so we have no choice but to conform if we want to do what we do to sustain.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the over-medicalization of birth that has occurred, I think, is part of why people, healthcare consumers out there having babies, have come somewhat inadvertently to this place where I think they believe, and look, I am not saying that when something bad happens, someone should be able to be objective at all. That's not what I mean to say. But we have created this environment for ourselves, and I'm saying like a very global we, where when something bad happens, someone has to be to blame for it. And in many cases, there is some truth, but it's usually so systematic. You can take it back as far back as you want to what happened before someone was even pregnant, and you can carry it through to the moment of birth and beyond. And you can find many points at which a different choice could have been made either by the pregnant person or by any number of care providers that have crossed that person's path. And yet we have to pin the blame on someone, and that someone is the person who was present at the time of birth.
Exactly.
And that's tough. It puts us all in a tough position, and it changes the way you practice. We can try so hard to not be that person, but little bits of it creep in, even if it's just from the mindset of, I don't want to lose my job today, and I'm just going to fall in line. I'm going to do what's expected of me here. Right. So, and that little, that weighs on you in the day-to-day. At least it weighed on me heavily in the day-to-day. This feeling like, whoever maybe was my backup that day, or whether it was a decision that was largely institutional. So many different ways this can play out in your mind and in reality, but that would affect my ability to give all the choices that I thought were truly reasonable to somebody.
Right. And it's true. And it clouded my career, because it was like when the options weren't there for employment, I had to work. I had bills to pay. I had life to live. I had to do something. So how could I parlay my experience and my training? And there were times when, I felt bad, like I was like, was I turning my back on what my heart said to do? And I had no choice, like over money, but I had no choice. Like I had to live, and I had a family, and I had an aging mother and stuff like that. And it was like things I had to do. And it was like, but that it's not what I wanted to do. So, like we talked about in the beginning, could I affect a model? Sure. So now I was a midwife in the next ring of Saturn, not in the front one where I wanted to be. Yeah, I got to work and jump in when things were bad, and my skills were there, and everything was perfect, and it was nice, but I still had to go back to this other life, but I still went home. It just, I get it. And it could be disappointing. So, to the upcoming generation of midwives, I hope the situation changes for them. And I hope that we in our generation can change it for them. And it's like, and change it for the ones who still stay, because, our brother and sister midwives have been there working on the front lines longer than we have. And we want to make that happen. But do we have to go to these outer pockets because we need to take care of these disparate populations of women?
Yeah.
How do we marry what's needed with what we need and what we can give? It's a conundrum for us.
It is, and the pendulum keeps swinging, right? Because I definitely see a shift from those who taught me how to do what I know how to do, who literally gave practically 100% of themselves to their practice, people who lived on call 24/7, whose families, suffered or not for that decision, all the way to what I see more of now, which is a lot more like shift-based midwifery.
Yeah.
Very few people beyond the home birth midwives and, people who run birth centers, let's say, who maybe have smaller staffs, are taking endless hours of call and doing like the purest form of continuity of care. But that continuity of care comes at a personal cost.
Yes. If you told somebody that you can sign up to become a midwife and it's great, but prior to the birth and the miracle and magic that happens at the birth experience can be 18 to 36 hours of labor, where you're with somebody, like, what do you do if you have a husband or a wife or 3 or 4 little kids and an elderly parent and stuff like that? Like, shift work is, midwifery was never geared toward that. It was always the support and the check-in. And in other countries, it's different. Like the midwife, like, for example, I look at the midwife in Jamaica. We all know Jamaican nurses who came from there and talk about midwives. The midwife checks in, she comes back, she takes care of the baby, she weighs the kid, she checks on mom. Some of them cook food. I mean, hey, great. They do all this stuff. And it's like, but they're also managing this panel of patients within their parish where they're coming through. You go to England where the nurses in labor and delivery have to be midwives because the system accepts the fact that, this level of care, you're doing it. And we kind of need to bring that back. But I don't know how we, as our own profession, can bring back the normal.
Well, because it's all decided by the finances and
yeah.
insurance companies and all of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
All of our decisions, which is why we have to see so many patients in a day, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. It's frustrating.
My hat's off to the small number of midwives out there who have started their own practices, who run their own practices, who see all their patients themselves, and it's them alone or them and 1 or 2 other midwives. It is a whole other animal. And I'm blessed that I got that experience as both a student and a younger midwife. And yet it wasn't sustainable in my life because I was a single mom. And I was like drowning incessantly in trying to figure out how to make it work. And I, like you, had to choose other aspects of my personal life and put them above my professional goals.
Right.
And I, in that moment, believed I could make it work in these other environments. And I did. I made it work. But I was like a ticking time bomb. And I knew that I could only sustain it for so long.
Yeah. That's actually a perfect way to say it, because it's like you force it to come, and at some point you're going to have to come to a decision. Like whether you had childcare, I had elder care. What do you do?
Yeah.
And it's like, and you look back at a system with disdain, like, what did you do to me? Like, you needed me, you trained me, I did this, I'm ready, I'm willing, I'm able, and I can't. And that to finally come to that exhale, say, I can't.
Hey everyone, it's me, Tanya, your host here at the Mother Wit Podcast. You know I sometimes invite my clients on the show to talk about their birth stories and postpartum experiences, but I want to tell you a little bit more about what those clients and I actually do together. I started Mother Wit to help people in the perinatal period achieve their health and wellness goals. That means whether you're hoping to conceive and struggling with high blood pressure or high blood sugar, or you're having trouble managing anxiety or depression in the postpartum period, or maybe you just need support and advocacy between prenatal or postpartum visits, I can help. Get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwitmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. I'm looking forward to working with you and maybe having you on the show too.
We hope you're enjoying the Mother Wit podcast. If you are, please rate us and leave a review in iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to your podcast. Thanks so much. Now, back to the show.
We're talking about, I've been thinking about this through our conversation, and now I'm just going to say it out loud because I think I need help naming this. I feel like on one hand, we're talking about something akin to burnout, but it's not burnout because it's a system in which we felt we weren't, you and I, or where we're in line, is that we were never able to do it the way we wanted to. So there's still like a fire in your belly to do it a certain way, and knowing that you can't, and having to make a bit of a U-turn to find your passion and your satisfaction in a different way, which we're going to get to because I so want to talk about all the fun stuff you're doing in your life, because this has been a very dark conversation so far. But it's like, just to finish this up, it's like burnout, but it's not burnout. It's akin to burnout. And I don't really know what to call what we're talking about.
True. It definitely needs some kind of concept analysis later at a research level, which I'm glad to take up. But it's the truth. It's just like, but you get it, because it's like, it's not that we're lazy, we don't want to, but it's like, but what do you do when you can't? It's not that we won't. It's just that we can't. And again, it's a system, and it's again superimposed on a physiologic situation that's not quick. Labor takes days. Birth takes time. We want it to take time. We don't want to rush this. We don't want to rush Mother Nature. We love her. But it's like that whole piece of like, what do you do with a scenario that requires time, but there's not enough person to meet the time? I so get you.
So on that note, before we launch into your books and all of that, I realize we've kind of skimmed over, or not even skimmed over, we haven't talked about it at all, your work in research. Tell us a little bit about how you went down that path and what you've been up to in these many years.
So I always knew that I wanted to continue my education because I craved knowledge. I loved it. And I had opportunity. So that was a great thing. So I did go on and got a PhD in nursing. My doctoral work was based on the experience of what I knew best. Nurses, full-time, pregnancy, what was it like? And ironically, I was the first researcher to look at the experience of nurses who worked full-time while they were pregnant. And it took the male midwife to kind of piece it apart. And I was so shocked and, wowed by what I learned from that experience. And it was a total qualitative study, getting what I knew best, talking to women. Let's listen to their story, dig it out. Let's go talk to me. I got it. And it was perfect. And I learned so much, and I've taken that work to so many different levels because it's definitely changed, and especially for the landscape of nurses in the workforce, where, for example, I was able to take my work and get some hospitals to agree that when you lose a baby as a miscarriage is part of bereavement, and getting that to count as time off for you, because it's not just an oops, it's an event. It's a huge life-changing event. we're getting human resources to say, you're right, it is. And let's give her some time to treat it like it was something, whether it was your grandmother, your mother, your brother, it was the same thing. It's that depth of importance. So my work was able to stimulate that moving forward. And that was great. And I've taken that nationally there. But getting into the research part of it, like, I am so, like, intrigued by obstetrical critical care. And because our women are so sick lately, they're coming in with so many comorbidities, and watching how the phenomenon of pregnancy is affecting that and changing the physiologic parameters that we have. So, like, obstetrical hemorrhage is, as you know, is our world different than when you come into the ER with like a gunshot hemorrhage or a GI bleed hemorrhage. OB hemorrhage is a whole different animal. And while we may treat it the same, the response is different. And now sometimes we usually have a baby here in the corner that we got to incorporate in there. And there's that sense of resilience that's amazing that's yet to be tapped into, because I think that gives an extra strength that none of our drugs can ever give. And bringing into that whole other experience of living while pregnant and navigating while pregnant. So that's where my whole focus switched over into like the nutritional end, and realizing like I have a chance and I have a window of opportunity to make an impact on educating women across the lifespan. And I have a chance to bring in where I can meet women, whether that's electronically, in print, on these podcasts and stuff like that. Like, where are women now who will hear my voice and hear my message and hear my information? So I'm taking my stuff to another level to go meet them where they belong, bringing my research with me. Evidence-based practice is one thing, but like, there's so much misinformation out there, and all you got to do is type it into your phone, ask Siri, ask Google, and you get wrong stuff. And it's like, and a lot of people who claim to be experts, which is really cool, but okay, you're on Instagram and on Facebook, and people are finding you and saying, oh, well, she's this nutritionist in prenatal. That doesn't give him or her any credence. She's just calling herself or himself that. Like, there's so much misinformation out there. So I want to dispel those myths, coming from a place where you can find my background. And I am doctorally trained, I am experienced, I am published, it's there, and I have science behind me, and I know how to comb through the science. So I'm going to bring as best as I can with what I can with the current information. So that's my latest goal.
So is that the direct link to how you went from something that is in the realm of science to what you brought to the world, which is your latest book, which is the cookbook?
Absolutely. And that cookbook started clinically, because what happened, and you can appreciate this. One of our biggest things that we had to do was nutritional counseling, and we had to check that box and say we did it. And there were so many questions where they'd be like, and we know we have a lot of women who are obese, a lot of women who are at risk for diabetes. We have a lot of women who had issues in their past pregnancies and stuff, or who had multiple endocrine problems. So you want to set them off on the right path. And then you'd go and you'd start to explain to them, oh, you need this right amount of carbs, you need this right amount of proteins, you need to do this. And they're nodding their head, and all of a sudden that vacant look came across their eye. Mm-hmm. And I will never forget looking out my clinic window and watching the bodega across the street, and there she was eating a bag of Munchos and a bottle of pineapple soda. I was like, that's not what we talked about. And I was like, and I got it. So it was like, a lot of women said, like, they were like, okay, I want to, but how? Like, so I said, well, here's this recipe. Let me show you. Let me write this down for you. And I started writing it on index cards or on like little square pieces of paper. And I would photocopy it and keep it in my bag. And I was like, do you eat chicken? Are you a meat eater? Are you a vegetarian? How do you do this? Okay, here, try this. Cheap food, cheap ingredients, few ingredients, not keeping you at the stove. Like, what could you do that you could make fast, that would taste good, and give you a meal or two or three, and that would get you through? And soon I was like starting to give out multiple copies of these recipes. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, I can only reach certain people. Let me go put this into a website. And then that website became Prenatal Possibilities. Uh-huh. So I could tell her, go to my website here, go on your phone, dial this in. And I could say, look, I have it broken down by breakfast, lunch, dinner, appetizers, snacks, vegetables, desserts. Like, you can eat. If you want to try this, these are some easy stuff, but here it is. And I tried to keep it very cost effective, not labor intensive at all. Stuff that you would like to eat and that you would hopefully eat long after you were pregnant. Stuff that your husband could find health for, or your partner, or your children, or your grandmother. Anybody that's in your world that supports you could either help do this for you or you do it for them, and that you would keep this going. So I found a small inroad to try to gather a larger population of people. And then, so I did it electronically. And what I'm hoping to do is use this platform that I've had now. So like time with you and on television and on other podcasts to, one, not only promote midwifery, promote nursing, promote men in midwifery, etc., but also promote health and promote the focus on women's health, and use what I can in the hour or half hour that I have to take this focus and use my voice to kind of say, let's go back to where we need this here, because we're missing something here. And something could be so simple to fix. Let's help this, and let's focus some effort. So hopefully to gain more resources and stuff there. But my goal with that was to create this community of women who is informed and who also could help each other. So I rely on other women who said, I tried this, here's what I changed, it tasted better, I liked it for this, and I take what she says and I incorporate it through and pull it, because culture is a big part of how people eat, but food is uniting. And I found that using food was my way to bring everybody, quote, to the table. And it was my way to be there. So I kind of want to maximize that if I can. And it's one thing at this stage of my practice, if I can't do it clinically, well, then I can do it professionally, academically, etc. And that's what I'm going to try to do.
It's really interesting because it sounds like your intensive research focus on complications ultimately led you to like just drilling it down to the most basic elements of health. And it really, I completely agree. For me, it comes down to two things. It's eating and moving our bodies, and eating and moving our bodies. Like at the end of the day, if I'm forced to focus on just a couple things that anyone can do and give them my energy in that way, it always boils down to these two things.
Absolutely. And it's the simplest thing. And it's like, as midwives, what do we always pride ourselves on? Getting back to what's basic. And it's like, there's not enough time with us. It's in a panel where you've got 15 minutes with each patient for an hour where they add 2 or 5 more on. It's like, it's incredible. And this, you've lived this. We want to do what's best. And sometimes we leave feeling frustrated. Well, you know what? If I can give my fellow midwives to say, here's the book, take this book with you. Yeah, it's a little thick. And it's like, but there's other ways to get that there and say, here's what my colleague did. And instead of having a pamphlet or an article, here's what he did. And I support this. And here's a chance where you could have a clue. My goal would be, can somebody bring my book, whether it's in softcover, hardcover, online, wherever. Here's a way to plan what you need to eat. And it's going to expand culturally, because I'm learning as I'm talking to women from different parts of the world, what they've done that is now based on science. They're not wrong. They're not wrong. It's like, it's just nobody's talked to them and nobody's put in writing what they've done. So I'm going to take their message and their lesson from their grandmothers and their mothers and everyone else, and hopefully bring it to the rest of the world, where if this doesn't work, try this, because we don't know what the other part of the world does because we don't connect. So if I can bring that to you, you know what? Any woman who's in the throes of horrible, hyperemesis or whatever will try anything. Let's bring these things. Or people love flavor, and pregnancy changes taste. Let me bring in other people's stuff, because this has worked around the world. And I value that connection with these women, that I'm learning from all these different generations of women. And the generational learning is stuff that we just need to write down because we forgot to.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it sounds like such a fun project. Well, tell us about your other books, because I know you have a whole series.
So my other books were done about STDs, and I appreciate the model of these books. They were meant to be like a Q&A book. So it was like kind of under the thing, if you can figure your 50 questions answered. It was meant to be a book for either a teenager, a young adult, somebody to hide the book in your book bag, under your mattress or whatever, or, not be obtrusive that it's this big textbook. Or if a parent wasn't sure how to deal with their child who may be having that. So my first book is on STDs. My second book is on birth control. My third book is on teen pregnancy. The cookbook is my fourth book, and out right now is my latest book on complementary alternative medicine.
All right.
Following that thing about what do you do when things are confusing, or you don't know what to ask, what to know, what you should do. And again, getting kind of into the weeds, like what are those dirty questions you just don't want to ask, and it's there, and it's meant to be at a high school, at a simple level for the easiest to the most complex that you could have it there. And again, vetted by, thankfully, the science behind this publisher, who I appreciate, was once ABC Clio in Santa Barbara and is now Bloomsbury. And that their scientific body has, definitely gone through all this other stuff and met its rigor, but it's there, and it's meant to be for any audience to have answers. And that's the one thing, is if you don't have an answer, at least you have additional stuff to ask when you go for your follow-up, or whoever you can ask to, or referral.
Cool. Amazing. It sounds like this is a book that everyone who does obstetrics, or even beyond that, should just have sitting around in their waiting rooms, maybe.
I hope. I envision this in the nurse's office in the high school, the health office in college, stuff like that. Like in libraries, it should be there, and sadly, where the purchasing power of these books is from like librarians and people who run those kind of offices. But again, as we mentioned in the very beginning, we're up against people, well, if you don't see it and say it, it doesn't exist. Teen pregnancy is out there less as it is now. Birth control is necessary given, this current climate is terrible. Like people, teenagers, young women, older women, they need answers. And they need a place where they can like exhale and say like, okay, so I'm hopefully giving them what's based on the latest evidence and research, and cutting through the junk and the muck and everything, and coming out with here's where we land. And this is where it is, and something you can understand to make an informed decision. Again, going back to that community of informed women who make choices for themselves based on the latest knowledge.
Awesome. Where can everybody find your books?
So I'm on every major bookseller. So Amazon, Target, Barnes & Noble, you name it, they're there. They can find me on Dr. Paul Quinn. I have my own website. It's www.prenatalpossibilities.com. That's where my recipes are. You can Google anything, put in chicken, beef, soup, anything, you name it, it'll come up with a bunch of stuff that's there. That's my repository for everything. So, and they can Google me and find me on YouTube and everything else, because that's where I hope that I put all my interviews where there might be some information that I've learned. I'm learning along the way, and I'm loving that. And I'm gaining information as we go, or stuff that I can impart on women and their families is there. But again, it's that thing. It's not just, you don't just have to be a woman to use my stuff. It's like, I have a huge following, which was great, of people into fitness and bodybuilding, because they're like, yeah, your recipes are so great in the protein. I've gotten this. I was like, okay, awesome. Because we need that support. We're in this together. And you know what? Women need to know that they're not alone. Yeah, they may be the one doing the actual dance and performance, and bless them for that. But they've got people out there who admire and respect them and venerate them, and that's what they need to understand. They're not alone.
Wow. Thank you so much for finding a way through all the trials and tribulations that we started out talking about, and like really sticking with it and finding ways to express yourself and support nursing, midwifery, women's health, women. I'm really impressed with the journey that you've taken, and I'm guessing about 10 years behind you in my journey. It's always really nice for me to hear how someone else has navigated challenges when we've experienced them at all similarly, because I'm often reflecting on my journey, and some days I'm thinking like, why couldn't I stick with it longer? Why did I make this shift? And sometimes the voice in my head negatively says, why did you give up? Which I don't think is what I did, but sometimes I think it. So it's really nice to watch someone who's leaps ahead of me, navigating their career in creative and satisfying ways. And you are such a midwife in your soul. And I have to tell myself sometimes that even though I don't go to work in the hospital every day anymore, I'm still a midwife in my soul.
Right. That and I want to capture what you just said like that, Tanya, because I think that's another conversation to have. Because what do we do to the midwives who are listening to us when we feel like we did all this and now what? Like I can't, I'm not able. When you have all that stuff, but yet you still have that in your soul. It's not going to change who we are. I still define myself when people say, "What do you do?" I say, "I'm a midwife." They're like, "Wow." And they're like, and then you got to unexplain what they anticipate. And it's like, I can't let that get me down, because it said in my soul, I may not be catching babies at 4:00 in the morning every single day. But you know what? I'm changing the science that hopefully other midwives behind me will use, and that other women who are birthing right now will use. And there's a role for us who may not be able, based on our families or our location or wherever, to do what people think we're supposed to do, but we still midwife everyone in another way. We don't have to catch a baby to be a midwife. You can change it through your research, through your promotion, through your advocacy, and we've talked about this before, like our own association needs our help desperately. And in whatever pocket we are in our corner of the world, with whether our panel of patients is 5, 10, 100, or 1,000 patients, we still need to be able to affect that change in there, because we're the person when someone says, "Oh, she's a I know one. I know Tanya. I know Paul. I know Eileen. I know Nancy. I know Pixie." You know these people. We need to be able to stand in our own shoes, in our own place. It's very lonely. We're there by ourselves. And I think what you're doing right now, we need to keep doing this more. We need to keep connecting. We need to keep talking what each other is doing to unite us out of those outer pockets, because that's where we're working. Yeah. And where nursing is more mainstream, midwifery is on the outskirts. So we need to kind of tap into each other and know who's there. Our own association does not do a great job about that, but we can hopefully fix that. But we need to kind of connect exactly what, like you and I just did. Like I learned what you do and you learned what I do. And together we're going to move that to our other colleagues back and forth. And that connection has got to keep happening. So I applaud you for having this platform and giving us this opportunity to talk.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, last thing I'll say is to the younger midwives that may be listening, students or newer midwives, I know that on this show we have some dark moments and dark conversations that might be kind of scary to hear as a new person. But one of the ways in which I have been combating that when I'm in my educator role is to start talking to students right away when they're still learning about all the other ways in which one can become a midwife, so that it's not so hard or sad or shocking if you should decide that the most traditional path isn't working for you, because that's something I had to navigate alone. And then I have found people like you along the way that remind me that I'm not alone in this journey and that I didn't give up or whatever it is. I know that I'm out there doing really cool and creative things that better our profession. But that came from hard times and hard choices. So I encourage really young midwives to start engaging in other behaviors, be it research, be it a kind of auxiliary things that are sort of interwoven and interrelated, but are not quote unquote midwifery early, right, so that they have wiggle room to move about in their career depending on where their life takes them and why that happens. So
exactly.
I say that in closing because if somebody has hung in there from the beginning until now and they're feeling like, ugh, geez, listen to these old fogies complaining, I hope that there's that piece that they can tack back on and realize that there really is a whole kind of holistic big picture here.
Exactly. You give so much of your spirit and your physical body, and it's like you got to have the right circumstances. What if, you don't have the right partner, the right home, your children have needs. It's okay to do what you can do when you can do it. You can always go back to it because, like you said, it's in your soul. And it's like, and as long as you keep up on the education, which thankfully CNM and AMCB give us, there's a way to still stay relevant in your clinical practice. It may take a couple of bumps to get back into the swing, but it won't take long. It literally is just like riding a bike. But, realize you can wave in and out of it as you need to, and you don't have to be stuck in like, oh my God. And it doesn't have to be, begrudging kind of work. It's there. But again, I applaud you for this platform, because it's these kind of conversations that I think move us forward, soothe our souls, and definitely invigorate us to keep doing what we do in whatever pocket we do it.
Agreed. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Tanya. So great to reunite with you and connect. I'm so proud of you. And so this was a decision I made that was like, look at that's one thing I'm going to say. That was a good one that I did, because look at all the change you've done and the impact you've had. That's incredible.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Mother Whip podcast. If any of the issues we discussed today resonate with you or your experience, I'd love to hear from you. Leave me a voicemail at 917-310-0573, or better yet, email me a voice memo at tanya@motherwhipmaternity.com. I really want to hear what worked for you, what didn't work, what support you'd wished you had, how you got through the tough times, how you advocated for yourself, or especially any tips you want to share with our listeners. I want to hear all of it. And if you'd really like to work together, you can get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwhipmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. Okay, that's all. It's wonderful being in community with you all. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.
And remember, listeners, nothing we discuss on this show should ever be considered medical advice. Please speak to your local provider about anything that comes up in this show that resonates with you and your needs and your health care.